When I first started this podcast, one of the main reasons I wanted to start it was that there were a number of conversations that I wanted to have with different people in my life. In particular, one genre of conversation that I wanted to have was deep conversations with other men. As a man, I don't know, I've often found it sort of lonely in that I don't feel like I fit the traditional mold of what society projects men to be. I've always found myself to be more of a feeler and be more emotional and not portray some of the physical traits or characteristic traits that it seems like men have to be strong and driving and forceful and authoritative and all these different things that I'm just like, I don't really think I jive with that. At times it's left me feeling sort of out of place, and then other times, like this time, I get to connect with other men like Angelo Santiago and have a deep, meaningful conversation about our definition and our version and vision of what it means to be a man. We started this conversation in one of the most powerful ways, which was just to share something that we were each struggling with at this moment. To me, sometimes the most powerful thing that we can do is, I guess, just set an example of what two men connecting on a deeper level looks like. So that's where we begin, and you'll hear Angelo and I share the things that we're going through right now and share the things that we're struggling with and why. That felt like a really meaningful way to me to start this conversation. That led us to some really important places of conversation after. I wanted to have Angelo on the show because he talks very open and freely on his Instagram and on his podcast, We Are the Men, about the things that he is going through, and he features other men sharing the things that they're going through. And it's not just the positive things and the wins and the successes. It's about the more difficult and the more challenging things, the places where we feel like we're falling short or where we are falling short and need to do some of the inner work and improve ourselves to show up better for ourselves and for the people around us and the people closest to us. So not only does this conversation have some philosophical discussion around why society expects men to show up a certain way and why maybe that's not the most helpful for men, it also has some things that as a man or as a partner of a man or as a friend, we all could do to start encouraging men to do some more of this inner work and this reflection to show up as their best selves and live their best life. Although this conversation is very focused around men, if you are one of our female listeners, I encourage you to stay because many portions of this conversation are also reflecting on the female or the partner perspective. And especially at the end, Angelo shares some of his perspective and some of his wisdom, and he put it in a really beautiful and eloquent way around how women or partners of men could support their men through this process of them doing some of this inner work or reflection or discovery or cultivating, as we talk about, this awareness in their lives and what it looks like to play the role of the partner. And I found that to be very insightful and very enlightening, and I trust that you will too. All right, my friend, here is my conversation with Angelo Santiago. Okay, my thought in the beginning of this is, I love having conversations about what it is to be a man and where are some of the areas that men can go deeper. How can we show up better for ourselves, for people around us? Sometimes I feel like we'll get to some of the conversation around maybe how we can do better. And I thought maybe we could start with just demonstrating what that looks like. To me, that would be something along the lines of each of us sharing something that we might be struggling with or going through at the moment and just having some conversation about it. Now, for you listening, I did not tell Angelo I was going to start this way. So I'm happy to go first unless you have something on the top of your mind that you wanted to share. But I thought we could just start with sharing and demonstrate, a couple of guys just sharing some of the things that we might be going through and struggling with. How's that sound?
That sounds incredible. And, when I saw your podcast talking about being a level deeper, I mean, that's the goal. That's the gold right there too, of men coming together and having these conversations of like, let's just go a level deeper. Let's like really talk about what's going on instead of, my day and the weather and sports and this. It's like that's sometimes that can be fun, but can we go deeper? And yeah, I'd love to connect with you in that from that place and see where that leads us, opening up this conversation at that depth. So I'd be happy to start.
Okay, go
because
for it.
what's alive for me right now is my wife and we have a 4-year-old son. I would say around this time last year, we were really struggling. Like we had recently moved to a new state. We didn't have much of a community. We didn't have much support. We're both trying to build our own businesses. We're trying to have our son feel loved and connected. And over this last year, like we put in a lot of work. We put in a lot of work individually on ourselves, together as a relationship in a marriage, and also as parents, for myself as a father. What's really real for me right now, it's like we are in a beautiful place. Like our marriage is thriving. We feel great. And yet we're still looking at this way of like, are we living life in the way that we want to live intentionally? Like we're both working a lot. We're both kind of exhausted at the end of the day. And like, we're not really pouring as much into our son as we'd like to. We're kind of struggling with this. And I don't want to necessarily call it balance, because I've had so many conversations with people. It's not necessarily about balance, it's about harmony. It's about finding the rhythm. It's about connecting of like, how do we show up for ourselves? How do I show up for her? How do I show up for my son? How do I show up for this like purpose in this business and this desire that I have to make an impact on the world? I feel at times like I'm stretched really thin. And I don't want to live my whole life like that, because I don't want to look back and be like, what was it all for? Right. And at the same time, I don't want to abandon my purpose and my desires of what I'm doing and just sacrifice that for family, for myself. Really, it's like there's this really exploration that I'm going through of how do I simplify life, but make it feel really full and really rich, so that I can look back at the end of my life and be like, that was it. That was everything that I desired, everything I wanted to. And so to go back to your question, what am I struggling with? I'm struggling with finding a way to take care of myself while also really loving my wife and my son, and also at the same time connecting to the importance of the work that I'm doing. And it's something that I'm constantly playing with and exploring of how can I change a couple aspects here and there to live a full life. That's where I'm at right now.
Well, thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. And I can resonate with it deeply. I'm curious about this feeling of, and I'll share my answer as well. But I'm curious about this, like when you say, I end up feeling stretched, what does stretched show up as for you in your life? What does that feel like, or what does that look like?
For a long time, that was showing up as physical fatigue. Like literally, I couldn't make it through the day without everything in my body just like crashing. Without like, I would tell my wife, she would look at me and it was all over my face, the exhaustion in my face. And I would say like, I have to go lie down. And I would call them. I would literally call them, I can't take it anymore naps. Like I literally couldn't like sit up, stand up, like really play with myself, like all of it. Like it showed up as physical fatigue. And once I kind of started to take better physical care of my body and get a little bit more rest where I could, like eat healthier, like the physical symptoms got taken care of, that started to go away. But then the stretch started feeling as this like almost murkiness or like fogginess of like what's going on in my life. Like I wasn't being intentional with the decisions that I was making of like, how can I put down the work when it's time to be with my family? And when I'm with my son, like how can I not think about these other things that I have to do? Or when I think about my business, like being really confused about what's the next step and just being overwhelmed. It turns into like an overwhelm, a dysregulated nervous system, like kind of like anxiety, like that is also for me a stretched thin experience. So all of that keeps showing up. And it's just in the work that I do, when I see those things, it's an invitation to take a look in the mirror, like really evaluate what's going on in my life. What are the decisions that I'm making, conscious and unconscious? And which ones do I want to nourish so that they flourish, and which ones do I want to say goodbye to, and really hold that firm decision-making process of like, this has got to go for my life.
That is a difficult process to go through. I'm just thinking about that for myself, and I often feel the way that you described stretched from a being physically tired, from just feeling this kind of like anxiety or angst, dysregulated nervous system, I feel that a lot. And then I go to that same question of like, okay, well, what can I try to set down? And I'm like, well, I don't want to set anything down. You know, all of these things feel important to me. I want to build a business. I want to show up as a great husband. I want to be a good friend. I want to host this podcast and have these meaningful conversations. It's difficult to figure out what to set down. I guess that kind of goes to, I'll share what I'm struggling with at the moment, is this idea of enough. And what is enough? When will I be enough for myself? When will I be enough for my wife? When will I be enough for my clients? You know, I'm finding myself, I try to pay attention to different cycles that I go through in life. And one of the things that I'm just kind of noticing is, if we went back 8 to 10 months, my business was in a bad place as far as I lost a really big client. I lost like 80 to 90% of my income. And from an income standpoint, my wife and I were struggling, and it felt hard. And then I had this, this dialogue that I'm not enough. Well, then I get back to, so now my business has rebounded. I'm earning an income. Some of our needs are being met. We're not stressed about some of those things anymore. And yet here I am still wondering, now it's just shifted to, am I doing enough for these clients that I have? Am I doing enough to still satisfy my clients and not drop the ball in my relationship with my wife? And it leaves me in those same points where you were just talking about, where feeling stretched and figuring out, feeling like I'm letting people down.
Yeah.
Am I letting my clients down? Am I letting my wife down? Ultimately, am I letting myself down? And I think that creates this kind of angst within me that I've been sitting with recently, of just feeling like, I just don't know if I'm doing enough, which I think translates to not feeling confident that I am enough. And that's been heavy for me lately.
Thank you, man. Thank you for sharing that. And that resonates with me so much so that I have a little sign near our kitchen window that it literally just says, I am enough. And it's a little reminder for me, because I can resonate so much to what you're saying, that, and especially in hearing you talk about, am I doing enough for my clients? Am I doing enough for my wife? Am I doing enough for all these? It's all these external things. And there's no answer to that. There's no answer for me to be fine, like, yes, I'm doing enough, until I look at myself and be like, I am enough. Everything that I do is enough. And that's a really hard place to get to for many reasons for so many people. But I feel that too. And it's the external seeking of like, okay, if I do this, then that'll add more, and then I'll feel like enough. Or if I do that, then it'll feel like more. And that will never get filled up, in my opinion. It has to come from a place of trusting, of knowing that I am doing enough. And as my capacity increases to do more, that more will also be enough. It doesn't mean that what I'm doing now, less of that is not enough. So that's the continuous exploration, invitation to continue expand ourselves and our capacity, and knowing that wherever we're at on this journey of ourselves is enough. But yeah, that's a big one.
Why do you think as men we get so focused on doing? I'm just noticing, as I'm listening to myself back and then hearing you kind of respond to some of what I said, like I'm using a lot of language about, am I doing enough? Am I doing? It's very doing focused, rather than, I guess the opposite of that would be, just being. Why do you think as men we put so much pressure on doing more, doing as much as possible? I don't know. At least it feels like that is what it feels like I'm supposed to be striving for at times, is doing as much as I possibly can. And that leaves me feeling some of these places.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I don't think it's necessarily focused just on men, but for the sake of our conversation and for the people that I work with most, I think partially it's a cultural thing. It's a societal thing where all of our accomplishments have been shown to be like what defines us. Right? Like how much money you make, where you live, how many books you've written or things you've created. Like, yes, we are creative beings. Yes, we are constantly creating and coming up with new ideas and bringing things to life that didn't exist before. But when we put our self-worth and our only purpose being on like, what can I create? What can I do more of? What can I put out? Then that's what we're chasing. That's what we're constantly chasing. And so that creates this desire to constantly do, to constantly act. And as men, like we are doers. It's okay. It's not a bad thing. Like we like doing, we like building, we like creating, we like working with our hands. We like, seeing our ideas come to life. And yet when all of our value gets placed on that, that's when we live in this like endless, like, okay, what checkbox do I need to check next? What's on my to-do list, right? It becomes this never ending kind of hamster wheel experience of like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm just doing. There's this one quote that I'm just still always sitting with, that it's like, it's not what you are doing. It's who you are becoming. That's what's the most important, is in this doing, you are becoming a new person. You're understanding yourself better. You're expanding your capacity. You're opening yourself up to more love. You are learning new things. You are becoming a new human being. And when you realize that's what the doing is for, and you're focusing on yourself and the becoming instead of the actual output, then that's where you get the reward, in a sense.
In your answer, you use the word intentional a lot. And am I being intentional about the things that I'm doing and where I'm investing my energy and my time and my effort? How do you go about discerning that? What does it look like or what does it feel like when you are acting or living with intention versus maybe when you can dissect that you aren't?
Yeah. You have to come at it from like a really observational point of view, a really like exploratory point of view. Like if there was a camera following me around, just recording absolutely everything that I was doing, and I can put myself in that mindset of just watching myself, then I can start looking at the things that I'm doing intentionally and which things I'm just doing out of habits that maybe I created 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And that's just become how I move through life. Very specific, unconscious habits that I don't even think about. And certain things that we do that we're kind of put in this little autopilot mode, like are beneficial for us. Like, right, whether it's like, okay, I wake up in the morning and brush my teeth every morning and I make my bed, and like, that's a habit that is now unconscious. It's just like, I do it. And I'm glad that I do it. Those are good habits that I built. And maybe at one point I wasn't doing that. And so I had to then become intentional about it to then build this new habit. But if I look at my life and from this third party perspective of everything that I'm doing, and see that like, and then start asking the question, like, why am I doing that thing? Is that thing supportive for me? Is that supportive for, in my case, my family? Is that supportive for my business? Is that supportive for my friendships, the community I'm building? And that can be as easy as like, how much time do I spend on my phone? Like that becomes a very unconscious like habit that I'll take ownership, that I feel like a buzz or notification and I want to like see what's up, or I want to maybe scroll through social media and I get lost in it. And if I were to look at myself doing that, I'm like, why am I doing that? Like, what is the reward that I'm getting from doing that maybe I could get from a more desirable activity, a more intentional activity, something that actually like fills me up instead of ultimately drains the life out of me. Because I think personally, a lot of the work that I do and I see other people do that I really admire is just bringing people into deeper awareness of how they are living through life and stepping away from this idea that life is happening to me into this experience of like, I am creating the life that I desire with purpose, with consciousness, with intention, with love, with connection, with commitments, with agreements, with just like all of it, and learning from it and knowing that I'm not in any way going to get it perfect, because that's like not possible. I'm constantly going to be learning. I'm constantly possibly going to be stumbling here and there, but the opportunity for me to stumble, step back, have an awareness of what just happened, understand the possibilities of what could happen instead, and then taking those decisive actions. That's where the intention, that's where the attention comes in, right? That is where you start creating a purposeful, meaningful life.
So is awareness in your mind, like that is the foundation? If you want to shift from, I'm just kind of going through life is happening to me, to creating an intentional life that you want to, that you desire, awareness is that foundational element?
Awareness is key, whatever you want to call it, awareness or consciousness. just having a real open-minded exploration of your own life. Instead of falling into roles like the role of an entrepreneur or the role of a businessman or the role of a father or a role of a husband or the role, whatever role it is that you feel like you're playing, right? If you step back and be like, one, is this a role that I want to be playing? If it is, great. How do I want to do it? And if it's not, how did I even get here? Right? Then that's like having that clear understanding of where you are right now. And if it's not how you want it to be, what steps do I need to take? And sometimes, and I had this conversation with somebody before, if like you ask yourself the question, what steps do I need to take to get from where I am to this vision that I have for myself? And if the answer is, I don't know, that's a great start. That's a great start to start exploring, to start asking questions, to start seeking support, to start connecting with other people who maybe have gotten there. And you're just like, how did you do it? Right? Asking the questions in the same way that you're doing this podcast. And what so many podcasts do and so many interviews do is tell me more how you got to where you are.
That foundational element, it seems like maybe even before you have awareness, it's having some level of curiosity as to like, well, why do I do this? Why do I have this job? Why am I in this relationship? Why do I live this lifestyle? Why do these habits that I partake in on a consistent basis, why do I do those things? I find it difficult at times. It can feel easy to apply curiosity towards other people, other situations. And then when it comes time to flip it on ourselves and be curious about, well, why am I doing some of these things? For me, that feels a lot harder. Do you find that to be a more difficult exercise?
Absolutely. And that's why, in my experience, in my journey to get to where I am now, it came through deep connection with other men and men's groups and really spaces where other people could reflect back to me not only the things that I was saying, but what they saw in me, like the actions that I was taking that didn't match up to the words, right? The values that I claimed to have versus what I was actually doing that were misaligned to those. Like, we are really good at BSing ourselves, right? We're really good at like, hey, don't look at this thing. Like, yeah, you're a great guy. You're super in integrity. Oh, but by the way, all this stuff that you're doing over here, let's just not look at that. We're really able to filter ourselves. We're able to hide. And right, that's the concept of the shadow. It's like, we're really good at denying, repressing, hiding these aspects of ourselves that we don't want to look at. And sometimes, a lot of times, having somebody else that's there to facilitate a process for you to actually look at those things and bring them, shine a little light on them without this fear of it, like that's going to help you uncover more about yourself. So yeah, that inner critic, that inner mind, that the voice within us that has protected us in a lot of ways, it's also limiting us, and it can kind of tell us what we want to hear versus what we need to hear. And so that's why, back to where we started this conversation of like man to man, sitting together, being honest, being open, being vulnerable, sharing like some struggles and having somebody just hear me out. It's like, okay, I can go there with somebody else. And it's not just up to me to figure it out on my own. And so many men fall into this trap of like, well, I got myself into this situation. I'm the one that has to get this out. Nobody wants to hear about my problems. Like, I shouldn't really be talking about this. Right? We go insular, we insulate ourselves from the external because sometimes it's stuff that we're scared to talk about. We think we're the only ones going through this problem, right? And that's the beauty of, recovery programs all around the world, is bringing people together who are struggling with the same issues and realizing like, oh, I'm not alone. Like, there's other people who are going through very similar things that I am, and they're taking the steps to change, to heal, to grow. And if they can do it, why can't I? Right? Then you get to doing it in community. Somebody once said to me, it's like, right, we're wounded in relationship, right? But we can also heal in relationship. And so that's a really key piece of doing this work with men, is bringing men together to be able to face each other and connect.
Okay, so walk us back in your story of how you got to this current chapter in your life. You're acting as this, you are this person that is helping men take that, you're providing the outside perspective. You're working with men. You have a podcast called We Are the Men. You're having these conversations that's the current chapter.
Right.
How did we get here? How did all this come to be?
Yeah. Yeah, that's you know, the life story. It's, if I look back on it, to look at where I am now, and I say this a lot to people, it's like my life feels like a total miracle, because where I was really in a dark place. It was really painful, and not only was it painful for myself, but like I was causing pain to those around me just in the experiences that I was having. So if I rewind the tape, and I look back, let's see how far back to go. You know, I really learned at an early age this idea of like, if I put on the outside, everything's good, I do all the external things to make people seem like, oh, life is good, he's doing well, he's successful, all things, then that's all I needed to do. And then on the inside, like I could be hurting, I could also be doing things that were really, you know, not very healthy, but it's okay as long as the outside world saw this image of me that things are good. And so I learned that at an early age and kind of kept that going. And what really happened was probably about 4 years ago, my marriage was falling apart. You know, my son had just been born. Our first son has just been born. We went through a really challenging time through conceiving and actually birthing. We went through a few miscarriages. My wife and I, like, we were just like really struggling, and individually and collectively. I was in a place where I wasn't really connected to anyone in a deep way. You know, I had friendships, but I was drinking a lot. I was doing drugs. I was just living on the, again, the external. I had a good job. We had a house. I had the cars. Everything was good. But like in the inside, I was hurting. And I didn't know that because I like didn't allow myself to feel anything. I didn't allow myself to be sad. I didn't allow myself really to show that I was angry. Like I really just bottled everything up, absolutely everything that happened to me. And then that would pop out in like little pops at my wife, right? At like situations at work, at things where I would just kind of like pop off at people. And that led our relationship down to this point where like my wife like just couldn't handle it anymore. She asked me to try therapy, and I did, and I went, but I wasn't willing to be honest with the therapist. So how could they help me out? Right. I went and, you know, spoke to, we had a relationship marriage counselor, did all these things, but I was just like hiding. And what I was really doing is I was numbing out. I was numbing out with alcohol. I was numbing out with pornography. I was numbing out with marijuana. I was numbing out with, you know, just like staying up all night. I was numbing out with work. I was really just keeping myself so busy and so engaged with external experiences that I wasn't able to have the awareness to look at my life and being like, what are the things about my life that I'm unhappy with? And what are the things about myself that I'm unhappy with? What are the actions that I've taken that I'm ashamed of? What are the things that I've done that I feel like extreme guilt of? You know, and I just had to bottle it up. And it was really, really painful. Add now into the mix, my son was born, and like this glimmer of like hope showed up in my life. That was probably the first time like tears flowed through my eyes. And I don't know how long when I saw him born and I got to hold him for the first time. And I think that was like the little crack in my armor that I put around my heart, around like everything, that I started feeling again. But then, you know, with a newborn, it's like sleepless nights, struggles of like, I don't know what to do to have this child stop crying. I still have to go back to work. All the normal things started piling back on. And I went back again to the unconscious, the old ways, the old habits of numbing out, of checking out. And again, back to my wife and I, like struggling, falling apart. We met in college. We had known each other at that point for, 18 years. And she got to a point after trying very hard where she was just like, okay, I could sense it in her that she was like, I'm going to try a little bit more, but if he's not willing to change, if he's not willing to wake up, if he's not willing to do the work that he has to really see all the trauma that he's gone through, me, right? All the wounding that I've gone through, all to go into the hiding that I was in, I could tell that she was like, then this is it. Then we're done. And she came to me at one point and she showed me something she saw on Instagram, and it was a men's group. It's called Sacred Sons. And she was like, hey, I think you should go to this. And I look at this video and there's these guys and they're screaming at each other and then they're crying and then they're laughing and then they're just like connecting. They're out in the Southern California desert. And I'm looking at this and I was in this place in my life, and maybe a lot of guys can relate to this, of just like extreme judgment, just judgment of everything around. Be like, oh, this looks fake. Like this looks like social media, PR, like whatever. This looks silly. I don't need this. I'm okay. I'm fine. I can figure it out. Like everything's fine. I'm good. All's good. Right. But deep inside, I was like, I don't know. I feel like if I don't go, then this is it. This is the end of the road. And so I went to this 4-day experience, in Southern California. And when I got there, I was still kind of like all armored up, all shielded up. I didn't know who any of these guys were. I was in judgment of them. I didn't trust them, all this stuff. And slowly over the course of the days, I started like seeing other ways that men could show up in this world. I saw men like shedding tears. I saw men, really letting out some bottled up rage. And underneath that, feeling this deep grief. I heard men talk about the challenges that they had as children, right? Maybe not having a father, maybe being, beaten by a bully. Like all these things that men face that we all tend to just conceal and are unwilling to talk about, it was coming out. And that was the beginning for me. And what really happened for me is I witnessed a man inside talk about how his father was never there for him and what that did to him. And when I saw this, and at this point my son was 1, I realized that like, man, if I don't do something with my life, if I don't like take action and fix and correct the things about myself that I'm not proud of, that I'm going to be the father that's going to be gone. And my son is going to be the one that's going to have to be doing this work. So at that point, I was like, okay, what do I need to do? Right. And I went back home. I made all these decisions of what it was that I was going to do with my life. I poured out all the alcohol. I got rid of all the weed. I, made this commitment, no more pornography. I decided to quit my job, which was crazy, right? All this, everything has to change. I was like a new birth, and it felt good for about 30 days. And then after that, I was just like, nope, everything's still messed up. I'm going back to the old numbing tactics. I'm getting into a little bickering with my wife. And so I was like, all right, I need to go back. I went back to another event. And then finally at that point, I like broke down. I really let it all out. I let myself be seen by other men like super vulnerably. I shared things with them that I'd never shared with anyone else in my life, things that I had like even kept hidden from myself because I was so ashamed of them. And I was like, okay, it's time. Now it's time. And then from then I've been on this continuous journey, and there's ups and downs, and there's stumbles, there's challenges, even to this day, like I still struggle sometimes, but now I have connection. I have support. I have other men that I can rely on, right? I'm connected to my wife in this open, honest way where we can share with each other what's going on in our lives, right? I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong. I'm willing to admit when I don't know. I'm willing to admit when I'm hurting. I'm willing to admit when I'm angry. I have ways of like expressing my anger in safe ways so that they don't get misdirected at other people. I have friends that I can call up and be like, man, I'm super sad about this. This thing just happened to me. Right. And they can reflect to me like what it is that I'm going through that I need to hear in that moment. So it's been a long journey, and it continues to be. And that's the one that I'm committed to being on, like from now until forever. Right. But just today, that's my goal, is to how can I really be open, be honest, not be hidden, really share what needs to be shared, say what needs to be said, ask for the support that I need, because I've seen the other way. And I know that if I didn't take those actions out of, from those experiences, I probably would have been divorced. My son would be growing up without a father, right? I don't know what challenges I'd be facing into, but I feel like my life right now, the love that I have in my life, the purpose that I have in my life, the friendships that I have in my life, it feels like a miracle. It really, really does.
It's a beautiful story. Thank you for being willing to share that with me and for everyone listening. I think about how maybe we look for these sort of external things. I've got to get rid of these things in my life. And yet it sounds like from your story and your experience, what was needed was you letting your guard down and being open to some of the internal reflection or sharing that would need to be part of it. I think of like this experience. It's interesting how you talk about, especially in the context of men. I think we all humans do it, but we become judgmental and skeptical of some of these different things that are out there. I'll use the recent example of my friend Nate led me through a breathwork ceremony recently. And if you would have talked to me 3 years ago, I would have been like, I mean, that's just some like weird thing that people do. Like, how could you're going to tell me to breathe and like that, it just, we seem to default to like, well, if I don't know this thing, if I'm not familiar with it, then I'm not going to trust it. I'm going to be skeptical of it. I don't need it. It sounds like you had the similar approach to, this men's group. Mm-hmm. And yet every time I find myself being open to like, well, going back to this curiosity, what if I were to just try it? And then I'll know, maybe I'll know like, okay, yeah, there was nothing there. But what if it's the opposite? And what if I go in and experience it? And what if something profound happens to me? Why does my assumption have to be that this thing is bullshit and this isn't something that I can trust and this isn't something that I should try? I just continue to find that when I am open to these experiences, and it often is an internal thing, I have to let my guard down. I have to go into it being truly open and saying, you know what, I'm going to surrender to this experience and I'm going to allow whatever needs to happen to happen. It's just incredible things show up. In my mind is, kind of changed and expanded into like, well, I wonder what else I've been really skeptical of that could be out there that could be beneficial. Why do you think we default to this really skeptical, judgmental nature? I know it's probably happening right now. You just heard the ad music play. You're starting to tune out exactly what I'm saying, so you can skip this ad and get back to the conversation, and I'm going to encourage you not to. Because if you continue to skip this ad in order to get back to the conversation, then at some point there may not be a conversation for you to get back to. Okay, now that I have your attention, that might have been a little bit exaggerated. Likely, I'm not going to stop producing this show, but you can help me make this show a lot more viable, and so I can continue doing this into the future. Fun fact, I don't make any money from this show. In fact, I actually pay in order to create these episodes on a weekly basis. And while that may not exactly seem like your problem or your issue, if you like meaningful conversations like the ones that we have here, well, then it is your problem. I could use your help in the form of financial support specifically in order to keep this show going and continually invest back into creating it. Here's another fun fact. If everyone listening to this episode were to donate the single cost of a cup of coffee, I could probably do this as a full-time job. That is a dream and a vision I have for myself one day, and I want this to be like PBS or NPR, where it's funded by the viewers. I'm imagining a show where we, together, collectively, decide that these meaningful conversations are important to us, and we don't rely on outside help or advertisers in order to keep them coming on a weekly basis. So yes, this is a long-winded way of saying I'm asking you for money. If you're in a place where you feel comfortable doing so, I am asking you to make a small donation to support the show. You can do that by following the link that is in the show notes of this episode to a place called Buy Me a Coffee. Now, by buying me a coffee through this platform, you're not actually buying me a coffee. It's just kind of a mental construct to make this transaction of money a little bit more tangible. Thank you in advance for considering supporting me, supporting the show, and for supporting meaningful conversations like the one we're about to get back to right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, I still do it to this day. Last night, I was having a conversation with my wife about astrology, and she's super into, she gets astrology reading. She's got an astrology reading for our son. She like even knows my chart about what's going on in my life, and I'm still a little bit like, I don't know, it's like, but last night I found myself, it's like, well, I don't know, maybe there's something here for me. Let me just give it a shot. Why not? So to answer your question, I think there's always something, the question you get to ask yourself, and I get to ask myself, it's like, what's at risk if I do this thing and I find out, wow, there's actually something there on the other side, right? And that's what a lot of, and we can call it like a healing journey or just like a transformational journey. Like transformation is hard. It can hurt, right? It can be painful. If we uncover these things about ourselves through these experiences, through breath work, like I've done some breath work sessions. I have the exact same story that you do, where it's like, no, I don't want to be lying on the ground, having somebody tell me how to breathe and like screaming out or whatever. It's like, I had all sorts of judgments and beliefs of like, this people are faking it, right? They're just making sounds or whatever, because I wanted to feel safe in what I knew. and what I understood. And if I were to take that risk and do that thing and something is unlocked within me that I didn't want to see, now I got to face it. Right. It's like once you, like, let's say it's like once you open your eyes, you can't ever close them again. Right. It's like you've crossed that threshold of now I know. And if I know and I'm not willing to do anything about it, then what does that say about me? But if I just don't know, that's safer. Right. If I don't try these, and at the same time, let me be real clear. It's like, there's also a question of like discernment, right? Of trusting yourself that if I look at something, and for me, that's something that's very clear for me. It's like a lot of the people in the spaces that I work with are very much into plant medicines, into ayahuasca, into these psilocybin journeys, all these different things. And I know for me, as somebody who's been focused on sobriety, I'm being discerning about that. Like, you know what? That's not for me right now. And that doesn't mean that I'm being judgmental of it. Like, I had to work through that judgment. I can trust that people who are doing it, they're doing it for their reasons, but I just know that that's not for me. So this is a very fine line of like discernment about what is it that I'm scared of, that I'm unwilling to do because I don't want to see on the other side. And also, what is it that I can trust within myself that, you know what, this thing just isn't for me right now. It doesn't have to be forever, but just like right now, I feel comfortable with where I'm at. So yeah, anytime we step into something new, there's a risk. And we sometimes get to be creatures of comfort. We get to feel safe in what we know and who we are. And if you could live your entire life that way, but I think that's the lifestyle that then you turn into like, oh, life just kind of happened to me. And I felt safe and comfortable, but I never took that step of what if I started my own business? What if I moved to another country? What if I actually like looked at these childhood experience that I have that had an impact on me? And right, all of it is an invitation to a deeper knowing of yourself.
Risk feels like a great way of summing up why we might have this skepticism or this judgment towards things. You know, I'm going to have to risk my beliefs and my experiences. I'm going to have to risk that I might be wrong about something.
Yes.
I'm going to have to risk that I might enter into a situation. And like you said, something might come up that I wasn't prepared for or that I didn't want to face. I mean, there is a lot of risk there. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, which is a relationship that I've been trying to, okay, well, risk and unknown does not have to equal bad. What if it equaled possibility? What if good things can come from opening ourselves up to all these things that we're talking about?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I mean, you have to look at it. You don't have to. I choose to look at it in the sense of like everything can be a risk in some way, right? Getting married is a risk. Having a child is a risk. Quitting your job is a risk. Starting a podcast is a risk. Everything has the possibility of going a way that you don't expect it to go. But what sort of life do I want to live? And again, it goes back to that looking from the outside. Do I want to live where I feel absolutely safe in everything that I do and I don't take any risks and I just kind of go through my days feeling comfortable? Or do I want to live a life where I am constantly being challenged, constantly confronting difficult things? Maybe it's about me. Maybe it's about my relationship to the outside world or others. And for me, I choose a life where I am here to experience all of life. Right? I'm not just here to experience the good things, the quote unquote good things, the fun things, right? I'm also here and open to witness the challenges, to witness the hurt, to witness the reality of what other people are suffering. Not and also the reality of where it is that I'm suffering, right? And have those conversations. Because, for me, I grew up in a household where we tried to keep everything light. Like it was a very happy household. My mom was just like all about joy and happiness and light. My dad was a little bit more of a serious guy, but he was never angry or intense or anything like that. Like I grew up in a household where that was like the focus. And so then I lived in this world where like, well, everything's just supposed to be happy and joyful and fun and playful and like good times and all that stuff. And then what it made me do is be scared of or hide all the times where like, oh, this sucks. This hurts. I don't like this. I'm sad. I'm grieving, right? I'm angry. I don't know how to do with any of that. And so for me, it's been a learning of it's okay to to feel all of it, to experience all of it, to share about all of it, to invite others to also feel that. And for me to be centered and grounded in the emotional experience that others are having. Can I just be like fully present for them and just be comfortable with it as best as I can?
How do you think about being a parent now? And, as you're reflecting on some of your experiences from your parents and growing up, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit recently. It's been a topic of some of my conversations. I'm not a parent yet. I aspire to be one someday. It hasn't been part of our plan at the moment. But I think about parenting a lot, and, the way in which we are parented and in the households that we grow up in, as I reflect back, like it has an impact on the way that we show up in the rest of our lives. And I don't know, I'm just curious about how you reflect on some of your experiences in your household that you grew up in, and now how that translates into you being a parent. Because I think about, my parents were phenomenal. I say were, my dad passed away when I was 17. My mom is still alive. And I think, sometimes when I'm sharing about my experiences growing up, like on this podcast, and some of the things that had that shaped some of my perspective that I'm now processing and working through and maybe trying to unlearn, it's not a reflection of bad parenting. It's not a reflection of their shortcomings as parents. Maybe this is my way of saying, Mom, I love you. You're a phenomenal parent. And there are still things that, because of the situation that we grew up in, had effects on me. And now I am working through some of those things and maybe wanting to think about or approach them differently. So that was my long way of saying, how do you reflect on your experiences growing up and how you now want to show up as a parent?
Yeah, absolutely. The reality is, like, if I choose not to be very conscious about how it is I'm showing up as a parent, I will revert back to what I saw, what I experienced of what it means to be a father. And I will just kind of replicate that. And some of those things, I agree, like some of those things are phenomenal things, and I want to replicate those. I want to be that version of the father that I saw, that I experienced, right? And then there's other aspects of it that maybe didn't feel so great, maybe did have an effect on me as how I show up as a man. And if I don't take actions to actually like look at those and explore those and uncover, like, okay, how do I not be that way? I am just going to pass that on to my son. And then he's going to do the same thing. And it's this sort of like generational experience of like, do I want to be the one that breaks the chain of this, this way of being for the next generation, so that slowly through every generation, change can happen. Change can still, we can keep expanding and learning more. And, the reality of all of us as humans is we're, I don't know all of us, but I know for me, I can say, like, I'm doing the best that I can with where I'm at, with what I know, with how I'm showing up. Like, I honestly believe that I'm doing the best I can. And it doesn't mean, again, back to what I said earlier, like, it's not perfect. I have shortcomings. I have things that, burdens that I carry. And then can I look back at my mom and dad and know that they had their own concerns, then their own burdens and their own challenges that maybe I never saw because they kept it hidden from me. And so can I sit and like really be with this idea of like, man, what was it that my father struggled with, right? Why did he show up in the way that he showed up? What was his relationship to his father and his relationship to his father, right? And so on and so forth. Like, there's so much that we all carry that we hide from our kids in a certain way, right? Because we don't want them to feel the burden. They're not there to lighten it for us. But all I know is that I just get to keep showing up every single day and doing the best I can, and being willing to see, like, when I have shortcomings, like maybe my temper is short one day, or I'm not being very present with my son one day, or he wants to play and I'm physically exhausted and I don't want to be around him, right? It's like, that, of course, that's going to have an effect on him. Like, of course, because he loves me and he wants to just like be a kid around me. And at times, like, I won't be able to be this, perfect dad that to him, maybe I am, but I get to look at those every single day and just know that, like, can I do 1% better tomorrow? Can I just like push myself a little bit more to grow, to expand, to be more patient, to find a way to, not give all my energy at work so that I have something to give to my child and be a better parent, and just be compassionate too. Like have that self-compassion to just know that like, hey, we're all going through hard times at different times. And like, maybe today just wasn't my best day.
I want to ask you about, in the course of our conversation, you've kind of stopped or corrected yourself a couple of times. One time was when you were saying something about, you have to, and then you said, well, no, you don't have to. And then there's another time where you were saying, all of us, and you said, well, no, I guess it's just my experience. You've intentionally corrected yourself in making some of these kind of blanket statements. Tell me about why.
Yeah, that's something I learned early on, and it's about taking ownership. It's about taking ownership of your experience, of my experience, right? If I go out and I say like, guys, like, we as guys, like we go through these times where we have a hard time, and when that happens, we all like get angry, and when we get angry, we start yelling at people, right? And all of a sudden, I'm talking about my experience, but I don't want to own it, so I'm generalizing it outward onto other people. And I'm saying like, yeah, everybody goes through this, when the reality is like, no, I'm going through this. And can I own that? Like, man, when I have a hard time, sometimes I get angry. And when I get angry, I yell at people. And all of a sudden I see that in myself, and I'm like, whoa, okay. Well, now if I can own that about myself and have that awareness about myself, what do I want to do with this awareness? Like, what do I choose to do? So it's a very clear piece. And I work with that with clients that I work with. It's so common that somebody's just speaking, and they're speaking in the we, in the us, in the they. And the reality is they're talking about themselves, but they don't want to own it. They don't want to look in the mirror and actually say like, oh, I'm struggling. I have a hard time communicating with my partner. I'm the one that's actually doing the stuff that I shouldn't be doing. Right. And so there's a piece on that. The other one that you pointed out, the need to, I need to, right? I should. All these, like, this is somebody else's like bar. Like, I'm using somebody else's bar to tell me what it is that I need to do or what I should do. Right. So if there's nothing that I need or should do, there's things that I get to do. There's things that I want to do. There's things that I choose to do. There's things that I'm ready to do. There's things that I am prepared to start doing. Right. Like, it's all about me making the conscious decisions about how I want to live my life. It's not that somebody, is making me do anything. And that goes back again, taking ownership of my own life, not letting life just happen to me, because it's a way in which we speak that has a lot of power. If I was like, oh man, I have to do all these things today. Well, it's like, I don't have to. Like, nobody, like, what's going to happen if I don't? Right? I'm not going to die. Right? So if I don't have to do anything, what are these things like, do I want to do? What are these things do I choose to do? And if I feel like I have to do them and I don't want to do them, then what does that say about my life? What can I choose to do differently? Again, it goes back to that awareness piece of everything that I do in my life.
I appreciate that reminder. My wife is very intentional about, she will almost always say, when she's talking about the things on her, let's call it to-do list, she will say, I get to do this. After, this call, I get to hop on another call. And it's a great reminder. Sometimes I hear her say that, I'm kind of like, yeah, whatever. And then I will notice, I will use the verbiage of I need to, I have to. And so I appreciate the reminder, because it is a very simple but powerful just mental shift of I think that goes back to what I shared with you in the beginning of always feeling like, I'm not enough. I have to do more. I have to, I need to. And it removes all of my autonomy in the situation. Like, oh, so life is just happening to you and you just have to do all of these things and you have no choice. So thank you for that reminder. That was a needed one for me today. I as we start to land the plane of this conversation, I want to, as I'm talking about my wife, I'm thinking about the female audience and female listener. I don't know if it's your experience. It's interesting. I've started a show called A Level Deeper. It's about just having deep conversations. I've had a pretty even split of guests who identify as male and female. And yet my audience is a majority female audience who listens into these conversations. I don't know if that's been your experience with your show, a show called We Are the Men, but it's just interesting that it seems like men at times maybe have are just less likely to approach and go into these sorts of conversations. So I guess I want to speak to that female audience. I'm thinking about my wife. I'm thinking about your wife who experienced you this certain way and was by your side through it all, and eventually got to a point where it might have been like, if you're not willing to do the work, then I'm not sure that I'm willing to put the work into our relationship. What is your advice, perspective, to share with the female listener who might say like, oh, I'm really resonating with this conversation. I feel like my partner, my husband, could benefit from doing some of this work that we're talking about. What's your message to them?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. And it's one that conversation that I've had with my wife, and my wife works with a lot of women. And we've had this conversation with some of her clients too, because some of the women that are in her program want this for their husbands, want this for their partners. And it's challenging, right? Every relationship is different. Every level of connection is different. But ultimately, I think, first of all, I'll start off by saying I think women are way ahead of men when it comes to getting to this point of like, am I open to be supported? Am I open to look at these challenging things? And am I willing to feel all the things like women are just ahead of us in this, and men are catching up. That's my opinion. And I think the women have played a really beautiful part and powerful part in drawing us out of the shell, the armor that we've been in, to actually be more open. That being said, there are a lot of men who are not open to hearing it from anyone, whether it's a woman or a man. So if you're listening to this, right, say if you're a woman with a male partner, you're listening to this and you're like, how do I get him to be more engaged? It varies. I think, first of all, there needs to be a level of compassion, right? For everything. Again, go back to the story of like, if he's so closed off to you, to imagine like what must have happened to him to get him to this point. And to also remember, like, if when you got together, if when you fell in love, you saw the full openness in him, you saw the full capacity in him, to remember like, this is what he's capable of. Like, he has this in him. He's just maybe hurt and he's armored up and he's protected. And it could be for a variety of reasons. And it doesn't have to be, don't put it on yourself, right? So invite them into that curiosity that you talk about. Just be like, hey, I heard this thing. Like, do you want to listen to it? Or would you be interested? Right? Or, hey, can I share something with you? And be open to him saying no, right? And be patient to the point of maybe it's going to take some time for him to open up. And maybe it's going to take the right thing to show up for him to actually start looking at what's going on in his life, the right message. And that's why it's like, there's so many men in the men's workspace like myself who are doing this work. And I know I can't reach every single man. Not every single man is going to resonate to how it is that I'm speaking, what it is that I'm saying, but maybe it's my friend over here. And that's why my podcast is all about bringing different stories. Like my podcast, I'm trying to reach men at the point that they're at and just have them hear different stories so that maybe they engage with something and something just pulls them that little bit that they have to. So be patient, have compassion, and push. Like, go ahead and push a little bit, if it's safe to do so for you. Go ahead and like give a little confrontation. And sometimes men are scared of confrontation, especially with their partners, and they'll close off and lean back. But, you get to play with all of it. And ultimately, and this is what I think it got to the point of my wife, is like, trust yourself, trust your intuition, trust your knowing of like what it is that you feel like you need to do in that moment. Respect your sovereignty, respect your strength, respect your love for yourself, to know like, what is it that you really need, and actually like say it, like call it in, right? If you pray, like pray for it, pray for your partner, right? And just like keep doing what you need to do for yourself to take care of yourself, and keep trying to get into, your partner's heart, to have them open up their heart. And if you get yourself to a point where you're like, I don't know if it's ever going to be possible, then confront that about the reality of your relationship. And what is it that you feel like you need to do? Like, how much more are you going to pour out into this relationship if you don't think something's going to happen? And maybe, just maybe, once you come to that realization and you're able to like speak to that to your partner, maybe that's the light bulb that turns on for them. They're like, oh my God, wait a second. I've been doing all this stuff so wrong that this is where I'm at right now. And for some relationship, maybe that's the point where things shift, where things change, where men open up their eyes and open up their hearts and come back in. And then sometimes that doesn't happen. Like, I'll be brutally honest, like sometimes that doesn't happen and relationships fall apart, but can you live with yourself knowing that you did all you could and that you're honoring yourself in the actions and decisions that you're making?
I think that was a beautiful, beautiful response to a very complicated and complex question. So thank you for that.
Yeah. It's painful at times to realize that people that we fell in love with, that we maybe built a life with, that we have everything, all these things, like we came from such a beautiful place. And now this person that I love is hurting. They're struggling and it's affecting how we relate to each other. Like, that hurts. Like, I can only imagine, like, I think back on the way that I was, and I take full ownership. How I was showing up in my marriage was like horrible. And I just I can't believe how my wife put up with me for so long. And I'm so grateful that she did and called me into a deeper connection to life and to myself so that I could be there for her, because now where we're at is, like I said, this miracle. And yet to know what she must have been going through when I was the way that I was. And again, having compassion for myself, because I was hurting. I wasn't consciously looking to be a terrible person. Like, I had just been going through a lot of hard times that I wasn't allowing myself to really feel. But that was just devastating for her and for our son. And so to know that she put up with that and she prayed for me and she kept trying, like, I honor her, like, I praise her, I lift her up. And like, I'm so thankful, because she didn't just do it for our marriage. She did it for me too, so that like I could come to where I am now and have this beautiful life and be a beautiful father. Right. And yeah, I can't say enough about the gratitude and the love I have for her.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, I'm grateful for her as well, because I think it sounds like that helps set you down a different path. And I guess I'm assuming that maybe if that didn't happen, maybe we're not having this conversation, and maybe you don't have the platform that you have with your podcast and the kind of work that you're doing. And so I am grateful for her as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Who knows, right? Like, the different paths of the journey that this could have ended up in. And maybe that was what I was going to need to like change my life. Or maybe, yeah, that could have just spiraled me down into a darker, deeper place where like, yeah, we would have never been having this. But it's all possible. And honestly, when I was in the place where I finally saw where I was in life and saw what I had to do to make the changes, like, I was terrified. Like, I didn't know, again, like, what's at risk? Like, now I've seen everything. Now I've seen how I am. I've seen how I'm hurting. I've seen the conversations that I need to have. I've seen where I was out of alignment, out of integrity. I've seen all these things. And now I have to take action on this. And in taking action, like, it could take my life totally this way, or it could take my life totally that way. And I have no idea. And I just have to trust that this is the right next step for me. It's what I have to do. And whatever happens is what's meant to happen. And then from there, I just keep putting one foot in front of the other and just being really active and engaged in my life, even when things get really hard. I lost you there for a sec, Chad.
Are we back?
We're back.
Made it. We made it almost all the way to the end without me freezing.
Yeah.
I was hearing you were saying, trusting that this is the right step for me, the right action for me. And then I lost you. Did you want to just finish that thought for me, and then I can edit my response back in?
Yeah. No, where was I? I got to finish the thought, but yeah, it was all about just knowing that the decisions that I'm making, the actions that I'm taking may be really challenging, and I don't know what the outcome is going to be. But I have to trust. I have to trust that if I know there's a knowing in me that this is the right next step, that's what I'm supposed to do. And I don't have to look 10, 20, 30 steps ahead. I don't have to know where the finish line is. I just have to know where I'm at and where I'm going, and just keep taking that right step. And I want to speak a little bit onto something I heard on your podcast. And I guess it's something that happened in a previous podcast I didn't hear. And then you brought it up on the one that I did hear, where you said one of your guests said that life is a thinking game. Is that correct?
Life is a thinking person's game. Yeah.
A thinking person's game. And I listened to that, and you guys were like in agreement. And I was like, you know what? I want to say something to that because like, I think we've turned life into a thinking person's game, but there's so much more to it. Like when we live just in the thinking, then we get lost in like what's actually in the knowing, in the trusting, in the intuition, into the believing, into the dreaming, right? Into all these other possibilities of what life can be because we overanalyze. And our ability to think and come up with solutions and plans and structure and create those things is like super powerful. Don't get me wrong. I don't want people to just like, I'm just going to trust life is going to happen. Right. No, like, yes, thinking's involved, but in our society, we value so much of our thinking, so much of our mind. And we get stuck in that, what you guys were talking about in that podcast of the overthinking, of the overanalyze, right? The paralysis by analysis. And we have to tune back in. And a lot of the work that I do is helping men tune back into their bodies, right? Because our hearts will tell us something, right? Our guts will tell us something. Our physical body, right? My exhaustion that I spoke to earlier, that was telling me something. And I could like overthink. I was like, well, why am I exhausted? What do I need to take? What do I need to do? It's like, but wait, no, what is that telling me? What is my body telling me? So I want to invite into the conversation a little bit more. Life is an experiencing. It's a being. It's an intuitive experience. It's a trusting experience, right? It's a spiritual experience. And it is also a thinking experience.
I love that you challenge some of that thinking. I think that's what this show is about. It's interesting as I'm hearing you say that. I'm agreeing with and resonating with, in that moment when I heard the guest say life is a thinking person's game. I am a very cerebral person. I have been for most of my life. I've talked about it a bit on the show of, I've made decisions with my intellect and with the way that I think, not with how I feel or with emotion. And so I think in that moment, it was kind of like, oh, good. Yes. I'm doing good. This is a thinking person's game. Okay. I'm okay. I should continue thinking. In some of my conversations since then, I've had more conversation about, well, maybe this feeling thing, there's some validity to that as well. And maybe this, sense of knowing, there's some validity to that as well. So I am very much still on the journey and on the path of exploring this relationship between thinking versus feeling, thinking versus knowing. So I really appreciate you kind of bringing that conversation back to the table because it's one that I want to continue exploring for myself.
Yeah, it's a continuous exploration, and since so many of us have been raised as thinkers, right? Like for me, the focus in my early childhood, and it was all education, right? At least my intellect is could I get the right answers on the test? Could I could I be the smartest guy in the room? Like that's what proved like I was winning. And it's been an unlearning of that and really trusting my heart, trusting my intuition, right? Like we talk about like, oh, my heart told me I shouldn't do that. It's like, oh, I have this gut feeling that something's wrong. It's like our body physically tells us certain things. So it is this embodiment practice. It is a returning to, the physical self and connecting back to everything that's at our disposal and not just so much on the thinking.
Thank you. Thank you for that perspective. And thanks for bringing that conversation back up. Yeah. I really appreciate that. And I think, I'm finding out, I'm discovering, I'm starting to feel that there is more beyond just thinking. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. Angelo, this has been great. I value connecting with other men. I value connecting with other human beings on this level. So thank you for being willing to go a level deeper in this conversation. If people wanted to find out more about your podcast, more about some of the work that you are doing with men, what is the best place for them to go to do that?
Absolutely. Yeah. You can find me on Instagram at Angelo Men's Coach. You can also find my website as wearethemen.com. The podcast is the We Are the Men podcast with Angelo Santiago. You can find it on Spotify, Apple. I just started putting it on YouTube as well. So wherever you get it, you can find it. It's really about a conversation of men just sharing about their lives, the impact on the world that they're making just through the actions they take. And I before we started recording, Chad, I was like, I'm excited to have you on the podcast at some point to just hear about your story, hear about what it's like to travel, with your partner in the van and create this podcast and your life experience, all to get you to where you are today, where you are inviting people into these conversations. So if you want to get in touch with me, feel free to send me an email, angelo@wearethemen.com, or hit me up in the DMs. I love connecting with people about where they're at, where they want to see themselves going. And I've been focusing a lot on relationship work, because I think for men, sometimes in the struggle of like facing themselves individually, like looking at the mirror, they will take a look at their relationship and see where the relationship is struggling. And in doing so, that invites a deeper inquiry into the self. Like our partners, our relationships become that mirror for us, where it's like, man, we're bickering all the time, or I'm in judgment all the time, where I'm upset all the time, or I'm sad all the time, or I'm closing down all the time in these relationships. Can I like now take that outside of the relationship and look at myself and be like, well, where am I shutting down? Where am I angry? Where am I bickering with myself? Where am I in judgment of myself? Like all this thing. So it's a gateway to the inner work. Right? The external is the relationship. The inner work is what really makes the shift in the person and impacts and ripples outwards.
I think that's a great thing to bring people's attention to. So thank you for sharing that. I will attest to Angelo has some great content on his Instagram. If you enjoy podcast conversations like this, then Angelo has many of them on his podcast, We Are the Men. So please go check that out, because if you want more depth in the conversations that you're listening to, then Angelo has plenty of that on his show. I'd love the opportunity to be one of your guests in the future. So maybe next time we can swap microphones, and we'll put you in the host seat and I'll be in the guest seat. That'd be a lot of fun.
Sounds great. Yeah.
Angelo, thank you.
Yeah, Chad, thank you so much. Thank you for what you're doing. Appreciate the invite to be here. Lots of love to you. And if you ever need anything, I'm here. It's great to connect.
Thank you. It was awesome. Yeah. I've got to give credit to my wife here. She was the one who originally found you and connected us. So I'm grateful that she has recently started help playing that role in this podcast, which has been a good exercise for me of giving up some of that control. And in doing so, it's created some of these really, really special relationships and these special connections that I probably wouldn't have found myself. So that's been cool. So the credit goes to my wife, Eileen, for connecting us today. Thank you for being here. Thanks for investing time with me. It's meaningful. And I love just knowing that there's other men out there who are on a similar path.
Likewise. Thank you, brother. Appreciate you. Appreciate Eileen, and excited for the next conversation.
I got to tell you, I had a lot of fun chatting with Angelo. This was our first time that we had met each other. As I told Angelo afterward, I credit Eileen to connecting me with Angelo, and she was really the one who brought this conversation to life. She had found his profile on Instagram and said, hey, I think this is someone that you should talk to, and she made it happen, and I'm glad that she did. It's always refreshing for me to connect with other men in this way, have conversations, let down some of the guard, and talk about the things that we're going through and struggling with. And for me, it makes me feel less alone. It makes me feel like what I'm going through or experiencing is normal. It's shared by other people. And there's some strength in finding community and finding others who are going through something similar. And I think we're better off for it. Two things that I really appreciated about this conversation. Number one, I thought it was really awesome to hear Angelo's intentionality around the words and the verbiage that he uses, and not using these blanket statements that everyone and all of you, and the power of sharing from your own perspective, your own experience, and how that means that you are owning it. And then also making statements like people need to and should to and have to, and that it removes our autonomy in the situation. It acts as though we have no ownership in our own lives. And I catch myself doing that quite often. The other thing that really stood out to me about this conversation was that Angelo was willing to bring up this idea of life is a thinking person's game and challenge some of that perspective. Having thoughtful, intentional dialogue about things where we may have differing opinions is really what the foundation of this show is and what I want it to be about. It helped me revisit that idea and that topic and think a little bit deeper about it. And I just give Angelo a lot of credit for being willing to come on the show and challenge some of that perspective in a really thoughtful and a really intentional way. I thought that was a cool exchange that we had at the end of the show. If you want to connect with me and the show on a deeper level, there's a couple ways that you can do that. Number one, you can follow the show on Instagram at A Level Deeper. And you can also send an email directly to me, aleveldeeperpod@gmail.com. Join us on Instagram where you can participate in this week's question of the week, connect with other listeners, share some of your thoughts on the show, and hear some of my thoughts as well. My friend, thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting these meaningful conversations. And I look forward to sharing another one with you next week. We'll see you then.